This episode of Over a Barrel is brought to you by Valero. Valero believes in being good neighbors. That's why they don't just fuel our cars, they fuel communities too, with thousands of volunteer hours and millions of donations. Right now. Coming up on Over a Barrel, oil prices jolting to their highest level since last July. That's going to send gas prices surging across the nation as well. Find out exactly how high prices are going to go on Over a Barrel, which starts right now. Well, welcome to the program. I'm one of the two hosts, Matt McLean. The other guy is Patrick DeHaan. And, well, first of all, make sure that as you're watching here on Over a Barrel, like, subscribe, listen, watch, email. We get comments. I shared some with Patrick a little bit earlier. We get all kinds of stuff going on. And make sure that you subscribe. And if you listen to us, maybe try watching us.
Let's do it. Yeah, absolutely. Smash the like button, follow us, throw us a comment. I was trying to hold my face together because Matt and I were laughing off screen before we started the episode. I think that's cleared out of my system, Matt. No laughing matter now. Oil is up to $80. So,
yeah, that's the question mark that I've got for you after we've gotten all of this out of the way. So let's get right to it. What is causing a surge in oil prices? And then let me ask you also this. Is that normal for January and February type situations like the first quarter of the year? Normally, you and I are talking about it happening, springtime, Memorial Day, April, May, that kind of a thing. What's going on? What's happened?
Yeah, Matt. Well, a lot has happened over the last couple of weeks. I'll share my screen here and we'll take a look at the graphic. Oil prices. Yeah, this is the 3-month view. Or actually, I think this is the 1-month view, but look at that. We were bouncing around a little bit, even back in October, oil hit 75, but look what happened earlier this week, $80 a barrel. You have to zoom out all the way. There we go, back to July, since we were about the same price. So what's been happening? Well, let me share the other screen here. And for those that are listening, we'll try to spell it out for you. But if you're joining us on YouTube, that's always an option. You can see the video that we're sharing with you. But Matt, all this comes down to U.S. sanctions. The Biden administration and the parting days of the administration has decided to up the ante, putting more sanctions on the so-called dark vessels or shadow fleet that Iran and countries like Russia have been operating. Those sanctions are going to make it more difficult for some of the dark fleet to deliver oil to countries like India and China. That sparked a bit of a rally. The other thing that sparked a bit of a rally, I don't know about you, but we've been seeing some extremely cold temperatures looking across the country. This has been sparking heating oil and diesel demand, as well as a big jump in natural gas consumption. So this is behind a big rise in the price of energy as well. Matt, colder than normal weather can mean higher than normal demand. And that graphic basically says it all. It's been a really cold winter so far.
Yeah, definitely something. Let's get back to the sanctions for just a moment. A lot of people know the difference. Some people do not. What's the difference between a sanction and a tariff?
Well, sanctions are basically placed on an entity, a party by the IRS. Those sanctions make it much more difficult for financial institutions to transact with those organizations or individuals, basically blocking a lot of them off from being able to use any U.S. aligned institutions, banks, large banks. So transacting in oil is more difficult. Sanctions can also target vessels that need shipping insurance, right? They need liability insurance to operate. And so sanctions can target indirectly the way that ships are insured. Tariffs, on the other hand, are more placed in the stream. If you like on oil, for example, a U.S. tariff is not a tax. It's not something a tax on Canada. It's something that basically is taxed by the U.S. On whatever item is being tariffed, whether that's lumber, energy products, natural gas. And so that is essentially a different form of tax, if you will. A sanction makes it harder for somebody to transact. A tariff is more like a fee for making a transaction. So there's a little bit of a difference there.
But
Um,
both seem to have some commonalities when it
yeah.
can come to impacting prices here in the United States, correct?
Well, sanctions, when you talk about the shadow fleet, sanctions make it difficult for companies to transact. Basically, that's a throttle on transactions, especially, these fleets have already been sanctioned. So additional sanctions that target them make it even harder for shadow vessels to ship oil. But tariffs, they're another form of restriction in that they're an indirect ability to control things like the flow of oil. So instead of blocking the flow of oil, that's what sanctions are trying to do. They imperil or slow down the flow of oil by putting a tax on these items. So tariffs have long been a way of protecting, like, the U.S. economy against cheap Chinese steel. If you essentially artificially boost the price of Chinese steel, it won't be as lucrative for American companies to buy cheaper steel as opposed to buying domestically produced US steel, right? So there have long been things like steel tariffs that would prevent an abnormally low price from kind of decimating the U.S. steel industry. I think that's one of the primary examples. So tariffs can be kind of protectionist, but in this case, they're being more used. I think, as you're referring to, the potential of 25% tariffs once President Trump is sworn in. That is not more of a protection instrument. It's more of a retribution tactic, I would say.
All right, so let me ask you this. When it comes to the sanctions and the jolt in crude oil prices, because of these sanctions, are we looking at a more long-term price increase? In other words, it's jolted to 80. Do you see that now as being a threshold or a benchmark, if you will, where prices are going to remain as such because of the sanctions and so many crude oil tankers now being basically anchored? Are you now believing that these prices may stay around this mark for a while, or is it just more or less the energy markets kind of reacting and then will settle back down?
Well, I mean, as you see there on the graphic I pulled up, a news story. The big risk here, that there's a lot of risks surrounding these tariffs. The potential that the U.S. would place a tariff on Canadian oil has brought a potential retaliation from Canada, who's now suggesting that they could cut oil flow to Canada if the U.S. moves ahead with these sanctions. So there's a lot of potential fallout here, Matt.
Well,
The U.S.
now,
and Canada have long been partners when it comes to energy, whether it's electricity. Canada sending a lot of hydropower into areas like New York State and the Northeast. They send the U.S. over 4 million barrels of oil every single day, and a lot of that oil ends up at refineries here in the Great Lakes. A lot of the refineries have been
so
enhanced over the
So let me
last
let me
decade.
let me throw out one quick thing there. The tariffs are one thing, but the sanctions are what I'm understanding
Well,
that
the
has
sanctions
jolted.
are on oil,
Right,
that
that has created the
clandestine
$80
oil.
crude oil price
That,
point
that that's
for
part
a
of
barrel.
that's part of why oil has gone up to $80 is
Okay,
because Russia and Iran are major oil suppliers. And if you imperil the flow of the millions of barrels of oil that they're producing in the market, well, suddenly there could be a delicate imbalance between supply and demand, right? One of the reasons why prices had been low is because a lot of that oil had still been making it out into the market. But suddenly, if you're cutting that flow of oil off through sanctions, there could be an imbalance between supply and demand, right? That supply all of a sudden drops because you're cutting this oil off, and that is what causes price to go up. The tariffs are quite a bit different in that the tariffs would impact the price of oil, but the challenge is refineries. The U.S. has long imported millions of barrels a day of Canadian oil that cannot easily be replaced. So that's basically the threat here.
okay. So that was the key, because I the tariffs are one thing. Fully understand that. The sanctions being the one thing that had me questioning, and only because I think I remember seeing a story a day or two ago about a certain percentage of the world's crude oil tankers that basically carry the oil back and forth to different places are now idled and anchored off coasts across certain parts of the globe. Well, when you take that many tankers out of being used, could that create a problem? which could drive prices up. So that's, and I'm not saying it's a high percentage, but I know that there are some tankers that are basically anchored off the coast of some places in Asia and some other aspects that I saw. I believe that was on CNBC, a story there that I saw that a couple of days ago, basically because of these sanctions.
Oh, yeah, sure. Well,
They're basically carrying oil that suddenly is now sanctioned and they can't do anything with
well,
it.
the
So now
oil's
what?
been sanctioned, but
Right.
the shipper may have lost their coverage on insurance, and so
Yes, that was part of the
yeah.
story.
So essentially, yeah, that oil is now floating storage, and until the shipper can get insurance or they can figure something out, a lot of the time, when that happens, they may start to turn off their AIS, which is basically their tracking, kind of like how a flight you can pull it up on
Yep.
an app. An AIS is like basically the ship's call sign, and you can see it. And a lot of the time, what happens is now they may turn that off, so they go dark, and they may offload that oil to another tanker that could be flying a different flag. So what makes it really hard, Matt, is when these shipments from like countries like Iran and Russia are being put in other tankers, right? It's hard to keep track of that, and so that's how Iran and Russia have been getting around a lot of these sanctions. Is it's kind of just a cat and mouse game of offloading the oil to another tanker, passing that over multiple times and then selling it to a buyer that unsuspectingly then is buying. But at the end of the day, well, and also the cold weather. I don't want to lose sight of that. Cold weather. There's some other reasons that oil has gone up as well. The potential of the Chinese economy rebounding, right? They've continued to try and mend up their economy by offering stimulus. So the interesting thing here, Matt, though, is that, oil went into the closing innings of 2024 and it was just downbeat, right? It was kind of bearish. And suddenly with these surprise sanctions on these dark vessels, oil has seen a tremendous resurgence to $80 a barrel. And what's really lousy about that is that's impacting, your wallet and mine. The national average has started to tick higher. As we pull up the data there, the national average now at about $3.10 a gallon. It's not too far off the mark, Matt, but and we'll talk about this in the weeks ahead. Seasonality is around the corner. So we're going to go from relatively low prices to potentially a bit of a perfect storm. So, and not even mentioning that, Matt, we've had some current events in the last week or two that have been on the radar as well. A couple pipelines that have had trouble or shut down in the case of California because the wildfires, the Cal Nev pipeline that brings gasoline into Las Vegas briefly shut down because of the wildfires in California. People don't think about pipelines, Matt, until there's something that happens and gasoline is suddenly not flowing into an area. There were a lot of lines in Las Vegas, but the situation is remedied now. Those pipelines came back online. And then another minor pipeline glitch. The Colonial Pipeline just west of Atlanta, they were searching for a leak that had been reported. Thankfully, this is happening in winter, Matt, when you and I are parked at home a little bit more often. Well, maybe not you.
I drive all the time.
But, demand for gasoline right now is about as low as it gets. And going back to that winter map, it's cold. The next couple of weeks, it's cold. And so as we pull that up, by the way, this is something, look at the amount of low temperatures. Look at Florida. I mean, we're talking about Tampa with a low temperature in the 40s. Look at Chicago, -6. Look how much of the country is wrapped up here. So usually what happens, Matt, if you're like a normal person, these temperatures, you're saying, I'm going to stay inside. I'm not going to go sled. I'm not going outside. I mean, this is when some of the schools in the northern part of the country are like, no recess for you. The wind chills could be, 20 to 30 below.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, the nice thing about, if a pipeline issue does happen, if something happens at a refinery right now, this is like the seasonal low for gasoline demand. And part of it is because you look at that weather map, we're looking at another Arctic blast, polar vortex, whatever the buzzwords are. It's going to get really cold.
Don't touch that device. We've got more Over a Barrel coming up right after our sponsor, Valero.
All across America, you'll find Valero at your go-to gas station, volunteering with local charities and fueling communities 365 days a year, so you can always get where you need to be, right now.
And now for the rest of Over a Barrel. No question. It makes one want to go south for the winter, or at least next week. So we'll just have to wait and see on that.
Ladies and gentlemen, Matt is announcing his vacation plans. He's going to get out of this cold weather blast. How long have you had that book, by the way? I feel like it's your fault that it's going to get cold.
I've had it booked since like last June, and so we will be doing a podcast. The backdrop may look a little bit different.
The show must go on.
The show will go on. Things may look a little bit differently. There might or might not be some palm trees, and
there might or might not be a daiquiri in your hand off the screen.
There may or may not be. And
I wonder how many of our listeners, by the way, have ventured in this form of travel. Why don't you ask? Maybe we'll get a poll question.
By all means, when the temperature gets this cold, I lived in Florida for years and I moved back. I'm originally from the St. Louis area, right? So I'm used to snow. I'm used to cold. I'm used to the Midwestern weather. Lived in Florida for years and my blood thinned, as they call it. And when I moved back, I have winter and I have still, and that's been 12 years ago. I still do not like winter as a result of that. So I was spoiled. So when it gets really, really cold, I'm like, why am I here? When I have options, I've got options.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you are a snowbird, hit that like or follow button. We'll see how many of it will pull that way.
My understanding is you are kind of now a snowbird as well. I think you are about to head south for the winter. Am I wrong?
Eventually
you're gonna out my plans. I might as well out yours, right?
How dare you take a vacation? Yeah, I'll eventually get down there, Matt. I'm going to do the equivalent of like a couple week walk down there. No, I don't leave for a couple weeks yet, but when I do, hopefully it's nice and warm. By the way, let us know what gas prices are in your neck of the woods, or if you're in Las Vegas and saw any gas lines, or if you're in Atlanta. I'd love to hear from boots on the ground folks. You can always email the show, podcast@gasbuddy.com. If you have a complaint, you can reach Matt on Twitter at Over a Barrel Matt. Matt, you want to give out your personal email with any complaints? We can do that too. I think you're on Instagram, right?
Instagram, yes. Facebook, yes. I get people messaging me there. There is a public page for that. And of course, Over a Barrel Matt there on X/Twitter/whatever we want to call it today. And then we'll wait and find out what happens with TikTok to determine if we do anything with Over a Barrel on that soon, because that's coming up very quickly. Let me ask you this. I'm going to jump back into the sanctions for just a moment because I had a question. It circled out of my mind. And then the squirrel kind of came back into focus for just a moment. On the sanctions, this has been put in place by an outgoing administration and literally down to the hours.
Yeah.
Do you expect the incoming administration to keep those sanctions in place? Do you see my question? Because it's not all that often that you have an outgoing administration in the week prior to leaving office where you make such a major announcement about sanctions.
I think this is a little bit of
such a jolt.
Yeah, the interesting, because it does get political. You have to wonder if it's like a political middle finger, to the incoming administration. Hey, I'm going to mess things up because why not? I do think the sanctions will continue. I think if anyone, President-elect Trump has talked even more harshly about sanctions on countries like Iran. And I do think that they're going to continue on Russia. In fact, there's a possibility he ramps up even more sanctions on Russia to get them to do what he wants. And there's been talk about that. Will President Trump ratchet up the pressure on Russia? That's a big deal. I mean, he said he wants the issues in Russia to be over. And here's the headline, Matt: Trump team readies oil sanctions plan for Russia deal, Iran squeeze, because Trump wants what he wants. He wants his way, and he wants the war in Ukraine to be over. So absolutely, I think that the sanctions are going to continue, if not be escalated.
It almost makes you wonder, take, for example, the Israeli and Hezbollah situation in Gaza. Hezbollah, is that correct? There are so many different
well, there's
factions.
Hamas and Hezbollah.
Hamas, thank you. Hamas. I said that and I'm like, that doesn't sound right. There are a lot of different factions of varying degree in that regard. But, both the incoming and outgoing administrations collectively admit they worked with one another to try to bring an end to that. and that ceasefire type of it almost makes you wonder if behind the scenes this was also something that both administrations may have worked together to say, hey, I got like 6 days left. I'm sure it was a lot longer than that. It's been probably in the talks for months, but whatever the case may be, we got 6 days left.
That's exactly what happened. I actually read the story about that last night, about how they both sent representatives over there. And of course, Biden really wanted to make it happen. And Trump, of course, had threatened, if this doesn't get solved, if the hostages aren't released, there's going to be a big problem. And so, you had a deal, and it looks like parties from both administrations were involved. So talk about a market win. Back to the sanctions, though.
That's what I was talking about. Did they work together on that is what I'm wondering.
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't know, but I both think that both, Biden and Trump are aligned on sanctions on countries that, have done this. I think Biden maybe softened the sanctions in the last couple of years because getting that oil to the global market was more of a priority. And here's the thing about sanctions, Matt. They don't always work. Even sanctions that Trump places on some countries, they may not work. They may push other countries to get away from the dollar and away from financial institutions that the U.S. Aligns with, because you can still get around sanctions. The problem is a lot of these financial institutions that are used for transacting will block it because they're subject to following IRS and U.S. Treasury Department directives. But getting back to the other big threat, not so much sanctions, which we've already talked about, but Canada. As we are just days away from the inauguration of President Trump, there has been, as the Alberta Premier has said, they're likely to come in on January 20th. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith said of the tariffs Monday after she met with President-elect Donald Trump at his Mar-a-Lago estate in Florida. I haven't seen anything that suggests he's changing course. So now Alberta, they have suggested that, hear the headline, an oil cutoff is not likely. Though it's been threatened, that certainly would be like shooting yourself in the foot. Both Canada and the tariffs, could really hurt. Premier adding, I hope cooler heads prevail, said Smith, adding Trump seemed interested in buying more oil and gas. And I think that's the end game here, Matt, is that this is a negotiation tactic. And so many of our episodes, what do you think is going to happen? Nobody knows. This is a roll the dice. This is kind of a roulette move. I mean, I really don't think Trump is going to put tariffs on Canadian oil. I think that he's got very smart people in the administration somewhere that are probably whispering in his ear, like, you're not doing this. But Trump is a very strong-handed negotiator. So I think that's what this is coming from. The end game is we really have to wait and see.
Yeah, it's for all of the political divide that even if you're hiding under a rock, exists in this country, there have been some similarities. For example, the tariffs that the outgoing President Trump levied against China, the incoming President Biden kept them in place and has done so throughout his entire administration. And obviously the incoming President Trump, once again, expected that to continue. And I've even seen him make comments that he would like to increase them. So, I mean, there's a lot of rhetoric, a lot of, I want to call it bloviation, if you will, in front of a bully microphone to make a lot of talks back and forth. And each political party uses it to their own advantage. And that's just a part of it. Guys, I've done news for 25 years, right? I understand the concepts of all of that. And it's not quite as good as it was in the past where, you slam each other in front of a microphone and then you both go out to eat and sit at the same table and make jokes with one another. That used to be the way that it was. Not quite as much as it once was. And that part I do say is unfortunate personally, because you were able to get a lot of backdoor deals done on some highly divisive stuff, whereas now it's a little bit more difficult.
Well, it is, but did you also see the Notre Dame Cathedral reopening, right? When Trump sat down and was talking to other state dignitaries, and also, at former President Jimmy Carter's funeral, obviously a lot of us saw, him leaning over to former President Obama and eliciting a laugh. So
yeah,
there's the surface part of being a tough negotiator, and there's still being friendly. And it seems like, for both of them, both sides still willing to talk. And that's what's really important, is at the end of the day, you put your differences aside and you're still people. I mean, politics can be really dirty game on both sides of the aisle.
Oh, yes, no question about it. And that's just a fact of life, and it is what it is. But
Yeah.
yes, absolutely. And it's always good whenever, two political parties can truly have I don't want to say dignified, but just an actual conversation
Exactly.
to try to figure some things out. It's to the benefit of literally everyone.
It gives you
And so,
some hope that people can
exactly.
still, so many folks, become so intolerant of other people that don't align with them. I mean, how many conversations has everyone had where your friends, your family may be trying to change your views? Um, you know, it's okay to have different views. The thing about
Yeah,
it is we still talk and get along and whatever else, because, I
that's
have
the
I have a
key.
very good friend. I have friends on both sides of the
I do
political
as well.
spectrum, and they both are respectful and listen, and we can, both come up with things that we don't like about our country and things that we do like. In the end of the day,
Yeah.
that's the beauty of America, is being able to disagree and not all be a bunch of robots that all say the same thing.
Bingo. One thing that I will say that when it comes to tariffs and sanctions and other aspects, I'll even mention this probably in future podcasts. I'm very closely keeping a watchful eye on the drone situation that's transpiring in the tariff situation and also sanctions. A very well-known company that manufactures about 85% of the drones that are in the United States. That's questionable now whether or not they're going to be banned in the United States, period. So I'm keeping a watchful eye on that because
There's a lot
the
of things.
availability. I'm just talking about, will these things impact you personally, tariffs and sanctions and whatnot? Well, right now, one could very potentially impact me, but not just me,
Yeah,
a lot of people across the country.
there's a lot of different things that I think a lot of us will be watching. Very much like President Biden paraded in the White House and canceled the Keystone and made it harder to drill. There's going to be a lot of changes that happen very rapidly next week. So, and we
Yeah.
don't know what all of them will look like. To your point, I mean, talking about drones, I have a drone as well, and I mean, there's just a lot of. I think, Matt, that's the one thing that's changing with the administrations, from administration to administration. Like, we're not like change one small thing here or there. There's more and more. Like, we swing from this side to
Right.
that side to this side. It's
The
it's
pendulum is moving quickly from one end to the
it
other,
is. And
rather
in
than
a
a
couple of
slow.
years, who knows? Maybe the pendulum will crack or it'll fall off because it's just swinging too wildly.
Yeah, that's we
And
hope
there's
that
a
doesn't
lot of
happen.
uncertainty for businesses, by the way. I mean, imagine
It is.
imagine you're a home builder and you don't know if there's going to be tariffs on Canadian lumber that you buy. Just imagine that. I mean, even things like that, Matt. I mean, the housing market here is so short. We're all seeing it, right? Where there's just a deficit of homes being built. The costs are astronomical. And now, I realize it may be a negotiation tactic, but to joke about tariffs on such a wide array of products. I had a chat with a friend who was telling us that he owns a business that they have a lot of construction equipment, and not all of that construction equipment that they need is built here in the United States. Not only that, but there's enough uncertainty over what next year looks like that they actually went on a spending spree in the last couple of months of this year because they're trying to reduce the potential exposure to the tariffs. And, a lot of folks like to think that they know President Trump like he's their best friend, like they know what he's going to do and not. But as a business owner, you have to mitigate risks. You can't just be like, oh, he's my friend, and then, oh, he doesn't seem like I don't know him anymore, kind of thing. So, and as a business owner yourself, I'm sure that there's some uncertainty over, what the next couple of weeks will look like. Hopefully it's not going to be a game changer, right? But there's going to
It's
be
it
change.
it is certainly the hope. I think, as with any incoming administration, you'll have some good things and probably not some good things. When you have an administration shift, especially from opposing political parties, you're going to want to move the country back in one direction or the other. Keeping in mind, we haven't had a situation where we've had a previous president be reelected with someone serving in between in over 100 years.
Right.
So we're in a bit of a unique situation because the guy that's coming into office knows exactly how to be president. He was for 4 years already. So there's not much of a learning curve there. He walks in knowing exactly what he wants to do on day one versus somebody like a fresh George W. Bush, a fresh Barack Obama, a fresh President Clinton, two of the three serving as governors of their state, having some executive experience. But let's face it, the Oval Office is a tier all unto its own.
And
But he knows exactly what to do from day one versus a learning curve like in 2017.
And to your point, yeah, we have somebody coming back in that, we kind of have some idea, right? He governed 4 years ago, and we knew, a lot of his policies at the time. At the same time, there's a lot of things he's mentioned since, he won the election 2 months ago that make you wonder what he's going to follow through on and what he's not, right? A lot of things that potentially could shift a lot of uncertainty, definitely a change in policies, but definitely a potential, even a big jump from what his first 4 years looked like.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, it is certainly something to keep a very watchful eye on. And
it could have a big impact on your wallet this year, by the way.
It very well could. So, these are the things that we definitely monitor. That's why I've even said in past episodes, as far as a business ownership goes, and I've talked to several other business, I'm a business to business type of a business. So I talk to business owners all the time, 30, 60, 90-day plan, anything beyond that, it's more of just a list of goals that you would like to accomplish, but chances are half of them are going to shift back and forth because of things that happen. 30-day outlook, you can almost get done. 60 and 90, looking decent. You can pivot, whatever. And then that 6 month is just like, man, that's so far off into the future nowadays. And when you stop and think, there are millions and millions of business owners. Most of the time, if you're going to go get like a small business loan, they want like a 2-year plan before they're going, they make you do like a 2-year plan. Like, where do you see yourself in 2 years from your business or whatnot? How are you even to put that to get like, I can't figure out 90 days from now. Half the time with a steady progression, you got to keep that finger on the pulse. 2 years to me is like, wow.
Speaking of 60 or 90-day forecast, why don't we say, because there have been some things that President Trump has proposed. Obviously, there's going to be a new head of the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. That could hold a significant change for what consumers are filling up with, right? We've often talked about summer gasoline. That is something that could be threatened. It could change. So, in the next couple of weeks, watch for some of these regulatory changes. Watch what happens at the EPA. Department of Energy head is changing as well, right? There are a lot of different things that could touch on oil and gas prices. And I think that's a big one. Obviously, President Trump has come in and said, drill, baby, drill. We're going to loosen regulations. We're going to ease the requirements to shift to EVs. So the next 3 months are going to be a really busy time where we're going to be talking a lot about the potential impacts from things that happen, maybe things that don't happen that could happen. So stick with us. But by and large, just remember,
we'll walk you through it.
Yeah, exactly. We'll hold the hand. We'll try to explain everything we can, but there's probably going to be a lot of potential shifts. And for now, Matt, I think, as we wrap up, for now, we'll keep an eye on it, but there could be some surprises in the next couple of months. And, hopefully our 2025 fuel outlook gets it right. But there are definitely some things that could shift.
I did get a compliment the other day, and I think you even mentioned the very same thing. And I think it's a very good note to end on. Someone was trying to figure out what our political positions were, and they couldn't. And they were messaging me, and I'm like, well, but that's a good thing. So we basically try to thread the needle very cautiously in that unbiased way. It doesn't really matter who's sitting in the White House. It's just an analyzation. And so that's the key for us, is to make sure that here on Over a Barrel, we always make sure that we don't sit there and point fingers and create opinions and try to skew it one direction.
Well, we may be seen as pointing fingers, but it's actually analyzing the situation.
But it's an equal opportunity of pointing fingers. It doesn't matter which political party's got.
Yeah, the fingers fly both directions.
Exactly.
The fingers fly both directions. You can always rely on me and Matt to try and break it down in a nonpartisan way, because you know what? I'm sick of when people point at gas prices, all they talk about is politics. Instead of doing an actual analysis on what's happening, people just simply say, oh, it's because this guy or that guy. It's because the guy I like. It's because the guy I don't like. Let's actually get smarter and try to explain some of that. And that's what we'll do for you. That's why you're going to follow, like, subscribe, or that's why you already do. So thanks for following along, and we'll break it down. Everything that happens over the next couple of months, Matt.
Yep. Well, for both of us here, you guys, we'll see you next week. And who knows where we'll be. Patrick could be someplace. We just never know.
We'll be here. We'll be around. Thanks for tuning in, everyone.
This episode of Over a Barrel is brought to you by Valero. Night or day, rain or shine, Valero keeps the pumps full 24/7, 365 with a reliable fuel supply. Because keeping pumps fueled keeps business pumping and communities moving right now.